So I'm not sure where this would fit into the timeline of any movie or any final telling of this story. But I'm dressed up now because I just did an interview for Iranian press TV about the Zio-Anglo-U.S. war on Iran, which failed. Just to give you the context for me being dressed like this. What I'd like to talk about now is hiring lawyers and how I did it and what the priorities were. So, after I convinced Miyoko Watai, the secretary of the Japanese Chess Association, is it? Japanese Chess Association? JCA, yes. Of the JCA, the secretary of the JCA, to introduce me to Bobby Fischer, and then convinced Bobby Fischer to let me represent him at an initial immigration hearing that was going to be held in a few days after I first met him. That was not easy. He definitely was not open to assistance, and he certainly didn't trust me. It was of great benefit to me that I was ethnically Serbian, and in fact Bobby started talking to me in Serbian to check whether I was a Serb really, and when I couldn't speak a word of Serbian to respond to him, he called me a liar, and I had to explain to him that I was born in exile, that my father was a highly decorated royal officer who had gone into exile and had survived multiple assassination attempts by Tito's assassins, and had several of his friends killed by Tito's assassins, and thus my mother had insisted that if I were to learn Serbian, it would only be at my own initiative when I was an adult, and that we would not have taught me Serbian for fear that if an assassin killed my father, they might kill me as well to eliminate the family. I'm the only son. I have a sister, but I'm the only son in the Bosnich family. So, here I am. I've been accepted by Bobby Fischer to be his counsel at the upcoming hearing at the deportation court, where they're expecting to just kick him out of there in 10-15 minutes. I'm going to have a whole section about what happened at that court. But once we survived the 2-day, 24 hours of filibuster that I delivered at the immigration deportation court, that stalled Bobby's extradition or deportation to the United States, then I had to hire actual real lawyers, because I am not a lawyer in Canada, I was not a lawyer in Japan, and I certainly was not a lawyer in the United States, and I could not represent Bobby either in the Japanese courts, because my Japanese is minimal, and I could not represent Bobby as a lawyer in the courts of the United States. So we now needed to get lawyers to stop Bobby's deportation, and we had to hire them immediately. So leaning on Miyoko Watai and my own network of activists in Japan, because I had already been in Japan since 1989, and we're now 2004, so I had a very good network in Japan. I had worked at the top of several industries, and I knew people in the legal field. Well, Miyoko contacted people, I contacted people, and we went through a list of top legal firms in Japan. And it was always the same story. We showed up at the office, and 4 or 5 completely colorless, energyless, secretarial clerk-style lawyers dressed like this stood in a row. So I'm going to back up a little bit so you can see this. There would be 4 or 5 Japanese standing like this, and you come in and they bow, and then you say to them, "Well, we've got an unusual case here. We've got an American who is a fugitive from the United States. He's been arrested here in Japan because his passport is allegedly invalid. We don't believe that. He says it wasn't invalid. So we're going to have to establish the fact that his passport is valid. We are going to seek asylum for him here in Japan, and we are going to have to sue the Japanese government if they attempt to effectively extradite him for financial crimes to the United States. So this is for a typical Japanese law firm in which they do not have an adversarial system. When you get into the courts in Japan, basically the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense lawyer are kind of a team trying to find a solution that's acceptable and fair to all in a normal process. And it's basically the judge who runs the whole proceeding. The defense attorneys are a kind of clerk who just makes sure that the procedures are followed. In typical Japanese criminal prosecutions, if I remember correctly, the conviction rate exceeded 97%. Think about that. 97% of, at the time that I was there, in the 1990s and into the 2000s, 97% of the cases that went to trial in criminal court were prosecuted successfully by the prosecutors, basically with the acquiescence of the defense attorneys, who were just there to make sure that the procedures were followed, and that all of the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. The judge tended to direct the proceedings, and there was very, very seldom an objection unless you found yourself an exceptional lawyer. I had some brushes with the law in Japan. When I first arrived in Japan, I was invited to go to a swimming pool in the middle of the night by some Japanese girls, and turns out that swimming pool was a public junior high school pool, and that despite the fact that the building was not locked and the stairway to the roof of the building was open to the public, the fact that I was found in there with another Canadian friend and two Japanese girls swimming without bathing suits in their pool caused us to be picked up by the police and then driven around Tokyo for about a half an hour while they told us this is very serious, and then they just let us out at the police station and said, if you sign an apology, there'll be no case. So we signed an apology. That was brush number one with the law in Japan. And then later on, I had some friends who needed help, and I referred them to some immigration lawyers, but I didn't know who the best immigration lawyer was at that time. Okay, so we're now looking for lawyers for Bobby Fischer. We go through, I think, 6 firms, basically having a face-to-face bowing session, mutual subservience bowing session with groups of 4, 5, and 6 lawyers standing in formation. And when we told them who we were going to have to sue, we were going to have to sue the government of Japan, probably the Prime Minister of Japan, the Immigration Bureau, and the U.S. government. Let's say of the 6, 4 of them just recused themselves right away and said, we don't handle this kind of case, even though that is the kind of case that they're supposed to handle. The other 2 said, well, if you have to have a lawyer of record to be present at the meeting, we can do that, but the chances of winning are 0. And that was day 1 of our search. And then in day 2, we had a suggestion from some friends, I believe, of Miyoko, Bobby Fischer's future wife, the secretary of the Japan Chess Association, that we go and see some immigration lawyers which were much more activist. We went in there and we met a group of lawyers, I believe 1 or 2 men and 1 woman. The woman, I would say young woman, she was in her 30s, had graduated from law in English in the United States in Texas, and had also graduated in Japanese. She was a Japanese person, and had also graduated in Japanese in Japan at a top law school. And the minute she started to speak to us in fluent English and to also simultaneously translate into Japanese as she explained to me the situation, I realized that we had a secret weapon. A, she understood the American law, which was the root problem that we were dealing with. B, she could provide us a linkage between Japanese law and U.S. law. And third, C, she did not say that we would lose. She said it would be very difficult. Now, in Japan, when you hear the word very difficult, it usually means impossible. And it said like this: Chotto mutsukashi yo. So chotto means a little bit, and mutsukashi means difficult. Yo means don't you understand? And then the wind sucking, which means there's nothing we can do about it. And she said that. And then she said, Chotto mutsukashi yo. But, in English, not impossible. I realized we had our lawyer. That woman was Masako Owada. And Masako Owada worked in a private law firm and part-time worked in something called the Foreigner Law Center, or the Foreigners Legal Center, in which she basically did semi-pro bono work for foreigners who simply could not find a lawyer who could speak to them in English, basically utilizing her training in the United States to find some kind of modicum between Japanese law, which is basically you are convicted, and Western law, which is you are presumed innocent. Masako Owada was a quick study. I had to sit with her for roughly 2 to 3 hours to lay out the entire case, my thoughts about how we could proceed. I had just done a 2-day filibuster against the immigration court, starting at 8 in the morning and speaking till midnight, and then it was adjourned to a second day in which I forced the court to wait until I arrived at 11 in the morning, and then it went until midnight, and then we pushed it over midnight, and then a superior judge just walked in, grabbed the gavel, and said, guilty, without hearing any evidence. Nothing, not one syllable. Guilty. So now we have a guilty verdict, and we need to appeal this guilty verdict within 3 days. So we had a 3-day gap to get ourselves a lawyer. So I believe that ruling was issued after midnight on a Tuesday following Bobby's arrest on July 13th, 2004. I can check the date later. We had from Tuesday until Friday, 3 days, but it was 2 minutes after midnight, which made it extend until Monday 9:02 when the office opened. So we now had Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday till 9:02, and that's it, game over. Because if we didn't file an appeal by Monday, we were just going to have lost by default. So we meet the lawyer on Tuesday or Thursday. I spend 1 or 2 hours with her explaining all of the case and what my theory was about how we could fight. She disagreed. She said, in Japan, you can't do that. And I said, if we don't do things differently than the way they're typically done in Japan, Bobby is going to be deported to the United States, not extradited. To extradite somebody, it has to be an extraditable offense, which means murder, rape, war crimes. These are standard extraditable offenses between the United States and Japan. But crimes of a financial nature are not 100% certain to be extraditable, and because of the sensitivity of the world chess champion, it was probably impossible for Japan to get away with extraditing Bobby to the United States. So the aim of the Americans was to just get Bobby deported because they had retroactively, illegally canceled his passport. and therefore he was a man without a passport. When you're a man without a passport, you are automatically, without trial, deported to the country of which you are a citizen. And at that time, Bobby Fischer was still a citizen of the United States. So we had a lot of trouble and a lot of things to take care of. We got Masako Owada. We hired her probably on Wednesday or Thursday following the July 13th arrest of Bobby Fischer. I gave her my lay of the land explanation of what we needed to do and said, what we need to do is we need to file an appeal against the deportation order issued at the deportation court, the immigration court. And we need to file that to the upper court because you can appeal a decision of the immigration court to an upper court. And she said, we have no grounds to appeal. I said, yes, we do. She said, what are the grounds? I said, well, the grounds are that Bobby Fischer has, and I knew nothing about Japanese law, but this is a universal concept taught to me by my father as a child. If Bobby has the right of an appeal to the upper court, then theoretically he has a right of appeal to the Supreme Court. Having lived in Japan already since 1989 for 15 years until 2004, and working at the National Broadcaster of Japan, NHK Radio Japan World Service, I had written stories and edited stories of dozens of cases of controversial legal battles in which extradition was at stake and whether there was deportation at stake. And I learned that actually the Japanese do have a compassionate humanitarian side buried inside their rigid robotic system. And that is compassion for Japanese people in particular. So, Tuesday, 12:02 after midnight, so 2 minutes into Wednesday. We've now got 3 days until Monday. We meet Masako Owada, I think, on Thursday. Wednesday was a dead loss. The standard male Japanese lawyers, you can just forget it. If you ever go to Japan, forget it. However, we got Masako Owada, I think, on Thursday. I spent a couple of hours with her and I suggested this. We're going to file an appeal with the Justice Minister at 9:00 Monday morning, so 2 minutes before the deadline. And our appeal has got to be based on this concept: that if Bobby is allowed his constitutionally protected right of appeal to the Supreme Court of Japan, and if he were to win that appeal, which in Japan can take up to 10 or 15 years to get up to the Supreme Court, and if he won that appeal, then Japan would have to let Bobby be free. They would have to let him leave. We would deal with the passport or whatever his citizenship was. We would deal with that later. But he had this right of going to the Supreme Court. So I instructed and finally convinced a very reluctant Masako Owada to file an appeal saying that Bobby Fischer's constitutional rights in Japan, under the Constitution and laws of Japan, would be impinged if he were to be deported on Monday or at any future time to the United States while his potential appeal was still pending to the Supreme Court, which could take 10 to 15 years. Typically can take that long in Japan to get to the Supreme Court. And therefore, the only manner in which Japan would be allowed to deport Bobby or extradite Bobby, which they were not planning to do, just deport him to his country of citizenship, would be with a guarantee. We were, as Bobby's defenders, insisting upon a guarantee from the Japanese government that if, after he were deported and after he was sent to jail in the United States, if 10 years later we won at the Supreme Court of Japan, that the government of Japan would now guarantee in writing that they would obtain Bobby from the United States, including, if necessary, invading the United States militarily to obtain Bobby and bring him back. Of course, the Japanese, an occupied military colony of the United States, could never consent to that. And the upper court, to which we appealed, had to put a stay on Bobby's deportation based on the fact that his rights under Japanese law could be impinged or violated if he were to be surrendered to a foreign power before his full right of appeal was exercised. This was critical. This was the turning point in the case, because once we had that injunction approved by the upper court that stopped the deportation or the extradition of Bobby to the United States, we bought ourselves fighting time. And that fighting time turned out to be 9 months. Bobby was arrested on July 13th, 2004, and he was released on, I believe it was March 23rd or March 24th, 2005. So, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. 9 months. Or if you count it, actually, it's 8 months because we started in the middle of July and it was 8.5, almost 9 months. Bobby became furious with me when he said, "Why am I in this jail?" I said, "I put you in this jail, Bobby," when he was sitting in the jail in Japan. "Because in this jail, you're going to be treated properly. You're going to not have anybody trying to shank you or stab you, and you're not going to have any deep state CIA paid killer killing you in the jail in an inexplicable accident. You are safe here in Japan, and it's better to be in jail in Japan where the Americans can't get you than to have you go to the United States where we can't get you." And this is what happened. We got the injunction. Bobby was held in the detention center, first at the airport for 16 days, and then after that he was transferred to a regular, longer-term penitentiary in, I'm not sure of the place, Yushiku, I think, but we'll fix that later, near 35 kilometers to a nuclear plant. Something that Bobby feared and opposed as a result of his discussions with his biological father, nuclear scientist Paul Nemeni. Okay, so that's the hiring of the lawyers, and a little bit more background. My father, as I mentioned perhaps before, got the gold medal in law in Belgrade Law School, refused to accept his degree from the German commandant after the Germans invaded the country in World War II in 1941, and took over the law school and the government. It was an occupied country. He said, "I refuse to accept my degree from the hands of a German commandant. I will fight, and when we win, I'll accept my degree then." Well, they never won. The Germans were driven out by the Soviets. The Soviets installed a communist dictatorship, and my father stayed in exile until 1992. 47 years in exile. He left Yugoslavia in 1945, went to Italy, studied law, and did a 1 or 2 year program in Italian language, which he learned in Italy. He did not speak Italian before. Graduated from that school with a diploma like a paralegal or a legal secretary, then had to escape Italy because the Italians were under pressure to return people to Yugoslavia, where they would have just been executed. My father would definitely have been executed. He had won the equivalent of the Victoria Cross, the Serbian Medal of Valor, extremely rare, the only one in his regiment. And he would have been executed immediately by Tito, who considered him a major opponent, since my father was active in student politics the way I was, and he was the only anti-communist elected in the student union elections at the University of Belgrade in 1941. So he was a marked man. Before he left Yugoslavia, there were posters put up by the communists all over the capital city of Belgrade saying, "Wanted, dead or alive." The Minister of Police and Sava Bosnic, reactionary activist, student, whatever other epithet they could have put on it. I'd love to have one of those posters. So, My father had 3 law degrees. Law degree in Belgrade, law degree in Italian language in Italy, and then when he escaped Italy over the Alps, climbing through the Alps by himself, fighting 3 Italian border guards, disarming them, not killing them, disarmed all 3 of them, escaped through the Alps, got to Switzerland, and enrolled in university in Zurich, and got a 3rd law degree in German at the top of his class. He then won a scholarship, went to McGill University in Montreal, and when he got there, they said, "What do you know?" And he said, "Well, I know law. I have 3 law degrees." They said, "None of those law degrees are applicable in Canada." Because I know history. And they said, "Okay." And I know political science. And they said, "Okay, then you can start your studies over at the master's degree and you can start to study again." So my father started a new degree. He got a master's degree and then a PhD from McGill University in history and political science and became a professor of political science at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton from 1960 on. He previously worked for 1 year or 2 years in Saskatchewan where there was the NDP Tommy Douglas, I think it was called CCF, the Canadian Confederation something party, I've forgotten, CCF, Commonwealth, Canadian Commonwealth Federation or something, a precursor of the NDP. As a child, one of my earliest memories of my father's understanding of the law as a duty of a citizen is like this. I was 4 years old, or 3, probably 4, I can remember it. So I was about 4 years old playing in a playpen in the front yard of my house here in Fredericton, a rental. My parents weren't wealthy. And my father was standing on the porch talking to me, and a big red fire truck went by, and I was excited. And my father was excited and came out to watch. He walked out from the house and walked out to where I was, maybe 15 meters out into the yard. And I said to my father, I said, "Dad, do you love the fire truck too?" And my father said, "No, John. I'm worried when I see a fire truck because somewhere there's a fire and people might be in danger. But why did you come out to look at the fire truck, Dad?" And my father said, "It is the duty of every citizen when there's an emergency to watch where the fire truck is going, and if the fire truck is going or if the police are going to somewhere near your neighborhood, you should walk there and offer your assistance to the firemen or to the police. That's the duty of a citizen." I remember those words today, probably as my oldest memory of my father as a lawyer, as a citizen, and as an activist. That's how I learned the law, starting from age 4. All through my life, when I was disciplined, when I was punished, when I had a problem at school and came to my father always made me present the case. Here's an example, somewhat after that, when I was about 5. "Dad, could I have a chocolate ice cream, please?" My father said, "Well, son, if we get you chocolate ice cream, you will not eat your supper, and your mother will blame me. If I get you chocolate ice cream, you will drip it on your shirt, and your mother will blame me. And if I get you a chocolate ice cream, you won't brush your teeth, and your mother will blame me. So, John," my father talking, "so, John, if you want an ice cream, those 3 reasons I've given you why I cannot give you an ice cream need to be answered by 3 better reasons why I should give you an ice cream." And I remember telling him, "I'll eat my supper, I won't drop it on my shirt, and I'll brush my teeth." And my father said, "That's your first law lesson, son. You'll do well." And he bought me the ice cream. All this added up to my defense of Bobby Fischer, despite never having studied law and having only taken one law course in my life, the cadastral law course that was required in surveying engineering about property ownership rights, sale, marking, and handling of cadastral legal records. My essay in that course got an A+ and was mandatory reading for the next 20 years at the University of New Brunswick.